Welcome designers. So today's video is based on a couple of requests that I received from you guys. So this is a video for total beginners who either are used to some other tools like Photoshop or Sketch and they want to migrate to Figma, or even if you're completely new to design and you want to get started with some tool, which is Figma in this case. So this is not a guide for UI or UX. It's totally, to learn the basics of Figma's interface and its features. So what are we waiting for? Without any further ado, let's get started. So first things first, we got to set up Figma, which is really simple because Figma is a web-based tool and you don't have to install anything to get started. All you got to do is just open your browser, go to figma.com, sign up with your email, and then you can get started and play around with the tool. So it's really easy in terms of setup, but you also have an option to install the desktop version. So this is the website and it's really creative. You can see because they represent everything, right? So you can do brainstorming using FigJam, which is also a tool by Figma. And then for design, you can use the default Figma tool, and then you can build design systems and a lot more things, right? So that being said, just go to the top and on the product drop down here, you have Figma and you have FigJam. Just go to the downloads of Figma, and here you have an option to install, get the installers for Mac OS and for Windows. So whichever is your operating system, just download and install it, or you're always free to use your browser and start working on it, right? So I'm using a Mac, so I'll just click on this and it downloads an installer. Just install it. I've already done it, so I'm not going to do it. Just unzip it and install it. Pretty straightforward. So once you've installed it, just open up the app, and this is how your basic dashboard of Figma looks when you come for the first time. You won't be having all these files because these are files that I've been working on, but in the very first time you come, it's going to be totally empty, maybe with a couple of help me files or instruction files, right? So you'll find those, but overall it's going to be empty. And this is basically your recent file section. On the left you can see here, and from here you can switch profiles to different profiles, right? And then you have your draft section where you have all your drafts which are saved. So drafts are something like, temporary files that get saved. And then you also have your community section. So in the community section, you find a lot of things, right? So you find templates, you find plugins, and a lot of files that are really helpful. We'll talk more about this later. So I'll just go back here. And then you have your favorite file sections where you can favorite your files. So if you are working on a file that's really important right now, you can just click on the star option here and it gets saved on your favorite file section, right? So that's really helpful. And then you come on to the main section, which is teams. So here is where you create projects for collaboration. So you can create multiple teams. So I think on the free plan, you can just create 2 teams with 2 projects or something. So there's a limitation on the free plan. I'm not very sure about the numbers, but there's a limitation. So once you create a team, this is how your workspace or your team looks. So inside a team, you can create multiple projects, and inside projects, you can create your files, right? So for example, if you're working on a project for a client, so inside that project, you can have multiple files, which can be web, desktop, mobile, and so on, right? So that is the file structure on Figma. So inside this workspace, or we call it a team, you can create multiple projects. So this is multiple projects that you see here. And inside a particular project, you can create files, right? So these are the different files. And on the right, you can also add some description. You can rename the workspace or the team, and you can add multiple people. If you're collaborating with multiple people, just click on invite members and add their email addresses here, and then you can start collaborating together on the same projects and files, right? So for collaboration, Figma is really an amazing tool. Then you can manage your members from here, go to settings for different settings about the plan and all that stuff, right? So I'll jump onto the team right here, which is community files. And inside this, you can see the different files I have under this project. So these are the different files, and these are some templates from FigJam. And to get started with a new file, all you got to do is use these options on the top, right? So the first one is to create a design and a prototype file. And the second one, if you want to do brainstorming or whiteboarding, you can open a FigJam file. And thirdly, you have import file. So if you've been previously working on Sketch or tools like that, you can basically import that file onto Figma. So currently, I suppose it supports only Sketch format. So you can just drop in your sketch.sketch format and it gets converted into a Figma format file, which is .fig. So you can do that as well, right? And that being said, let's just start with a new file. So I'll click on new design file and it opens up a new file, right? So it behaves the same way as a browser. If you see here, you have this plus button, like you add new tabs, which is nothing but new files. So that is how it behaves. So the first thing you got to notice here is the file name, right? So this is the community files project, and under that is the file that we just created. So that is the file structure. You can also see it here. And then the first thing you got to do is rename your file. So I'll just click on this and I'll rename this as new file demo, and it gets saved with this name. And you can use this drop down to see some extra options. So you have some version history. So as you keep working working, you can have some versions that are saved so that you can check back or revert back to a particular version. So this is really useful when you work on a project and you want to see the history of the progress. And then you can export this file as a .fig format, and then you have some options to duplicate the file, rename the file, and favorite this file or just delete it, right? So these are different options that you have under the file. And on the right side you can see some options. So this is to start conversation. You can have a voice call with the people collaborating on the file. So this is a paid version, you won't have it on the free version of Figma. And then you have your profile, you can highlight yourself. If you're collaborating and you want other people to see you, you can do a spotlight me. And then you have the option to share. So if you want multiple people to look at this file, you can just copy the link and send it to them as a public link, or you can also limit the access by using the email IDs and giving them different access levels. So this is all about sharing. And if you want to create a design and put it on your website, you can also use the get embed code and put it on your website where people can see it. And then you also have an option to publish it to the community. So if you feel this is a really good file that the people can use, you can put it on the community as well. And then you have the option of a play button here, which is present. So this comes handy when you want to present your prototype. So you can add links to multiple options and show the user flow and animate things using the prototype feature. So that is when you use this option. And then you have different zoom settings, and if you want rulers or outline, you want to add grids, you can use it. So if you're used to rulers, just click on this and you can see the ruler is added. If you don't want it, you can remove it. So those are the different options that you find here. And then moving on to the left, you can see some menu or the tool options right here. So if I click on the main menu here with the Figma icon, you can see that it has different options. So if I go into file, you can see I can open a new file, import a sketch file, or also save a local copy of it. So right now everything is on the cloud, but if you click on save copy, it saves a .fig format file on your desktop so that you can use it later, keep it as a backup or things like that. Then you also have options to export to PDF and all that. Then all the other different things like copy properties. So these are all things that we'll be using as you proceed into advanced levels. But as of now, I don't think you need to worry about all this because this is just a beginner guide. Then you have plugins, libraries. So we'll be talking more about this later. So that is it for the main menu. Then you have your main option, your primary tool, which is your move tool. So most of the cases, 95% of the cases, you'll be on your move tool. So you also have shortcuts right here. One thing I want to mention here is if you want to learn the shortcuts, which is really important, just go to the option here, which is a question mark. And then you have the option of keyboard shortcuts. Just click on this and you can see all the different shortcuts that are there on Figma. So it's really good if you learn these shortcuts, not everything, but the popular ones which you keep using it quite often. So we'll talk more about this as well. So that being said, this is the move tool, which is the most primary tool that you keep using on Figma. Then you have your scale tool. This is helpful when you want to scale things in proper aspect ratio. And then you have your frame tool. So if you have used previous design tools like Adobe XD or Sketch, you have an option of artboard, which is nothing but a screen. So in Figma, it is called as a frame. So if you want to start a new artboard or a screen, you just start with a frame. So that is how you use frames. And then you have slice. This is again for, slicing different assets. And then you have your different shapes. So these are the basic shapes that you can use on Figma. So you can just click on the shape and start drawing different shapes, right? So that adds the different shapes onto the screen. So that is how you use different shapes. I'll just delete it back again. And then you have your pen tool. So pen tool is basically for creating, nodes, and then you can use your Bezier curves to create shapes and complete it, right? So that is how you use your pen tool, which is again very similar to other design tools. And then you also have a pencil tool, which is basically just for scribbling. So I can just, scribble things and it works on Figma. And then you have your text tool, which is just again to add some text on the screen. So you can see I can add text. And then you have your hand tool, which is to basically move around the screen or the canvas. And then you have your comment options. So once you have done creating your designs, you want to share it with different stakeholders where people can add comments so that you can reply to that or resolve it. So that is when you use comments. Just click on the design and start adding your comments, right? So this is really helpful for collaborating with multiple people and using it as a proper design tool, right? So those are the different tools that are being on the top. And then you also have some options on the right, which is design, prototype, and inspect. But once we start creating things, you'll be seeing more options, and that is when we can I can explain you this much better. So what we'll do is first we'll create a very basic design just to see how things work. So first thing, as I mentioned, you got to use a frame, which is you can press the button F or you can press the button A. So both work the same, or you can just click here to add a frame. frame. So you can click and drag the frame and keep it of a size that you like, or you can use some standard frames or of standard devices, for which you just got to go to the option right here, click on this, and you see a lot of standard devices that are there in the market which are commonly used. So right now I'll just go for an iPhone 8, and you can see this is the frame size of an iPhone, which makes it really convenient, right? You don't need to go to Google and search for an iPhone 8 device size and use it. You have everything right here. So right now we have a frame here, and I'll just draw a rectangle just to show you different properties right here. So here I drew a rectangle, and on the left you can see there's a layers panel where you can see the different layers that are there on your canvas. So this is basically called your canvas, and whatever is there on the canvas you can see it on the layers panel. So right now there is a frame, and inside a frame there's a rectangle, right? So that is what is being represented here. And then you have your assets panel where you see different assets or components. So right now I have not created any component, but once you create components, which is basically to reuse a particular UI element multiple times, right? And to keep everything consistent, components are really important. So right now there is nothing on the components, and that is why you're not seeing anything here, but I'll be showing you an example for this as well. And then you have some options here as well to add libraries. So if you already have a design system in place, you can just click this option and enable your design system. So these are again advanced things which we'll be talking on the next sessions in this Figma tutorial series. And then you also have different pages right here. So if you click on this drop down, you can see that you can add multiple pages on Figma. So if you're working on a project and you want to divide it into different modules, let's say login, dashboard, and things like that, you can do that. Or you can also keep one for your research, one for your wireframing, one for your final mockups. So it's all about organizing things. And on the free plan, I suppose you can just add 2 or 3 pages, but on the paid plan you can add multiple pages, as you can see here. So that is how it works. So let me just go back to page 1. You can also rename your pages, that is also possible. So now let's move on to the right side of the tool. So once I click on a layer, you can see the properties related to that layer on the right side. So I clicked on this rectangle, and you can see the different properties related to this rectangle. You can see the x-axis, the y-axis. You can move it, as you can see. I just need to click on this and just drag it, and it reflects, or you can give it a value right here. So that is how it works. And then you have your width, your height. You can modify this as well, so you can see it reflects there, and I can move the height as well. So that's really good. You can rotate your object from here, and this is for adding rounded corners. So if you don't want sharp corners, I can just change this, and you can see that it got a rounded corner on its edges, right? You can have this option of having independent corners as well. So if you don't want a sharp corner on one end, so you just make it 0, and you can see one end is sharp and the others are rounded. So that is the option for that. And then you have constraints, which is basically to add fixed positions for responsive design. So if you see here, if I click on this frame and I start expanding it, you see that nothing changes to the rectangle on the top, right? But if I make this constraint to the right and to the bottom right, so now if I try to resize the frame, you will see it changes its position along with the frame, right? So this is really useful when you create responsive designs and auto layout designs, right? So that being said, I'll just undo it back again and put it back to the same position. Let me just zoom in. So that was about the constraints. And then you have layer options for different blending modes. You can use normal, multiply if you want to apply blending modes. Then you have the opacity of the object right here. So if I change this to 50, it gets lightened. So that was the opacity. And then you can turn off your layer as well. So it just hides the layer and unhides it. You can also hide the layer from the left side as well. So here you have the eye option. If I click on it, it just turns off the layer, right? And you also have the option to lock it. So if you don't want any more further changes on that layer, or you don't want it to be clickable, you just make this as a lock layer, and you won't be able to edit it further again unless you unlock it, right? So that was the layer properties. Then you have your fill. So you can add different fills from here. So if I want to change the color, you just change the color, and that is how you change the fill. You also can change the opacity of the fill. You can hide the fill as well, or add multiple fills if you want. Here is the option to add styles, but we'll talk more about this later. And then you can add stroke as well. So if I click on stroke, I can add a particular stroke to this. So I can select a color, I can increase the width of the stroke, and you can see the stroke is added. You can choose where you want the stroke to be centered or outside. So those are the options. And then you have this new option which is recently added. We want to add stroke on just one side. So if I select bottom, you can see that the stroke is just on the bottom. But if I select all, it gets added on all the sides. So that is an option as well. And same as usual, you can add multiple strokes and add style as well. And then you have the FX panel. So in the FX effects, you can basically add 4 different effects, which is inner shadow, drop down shadow, layer blur, and background blur. We'll talk more about these on the next sessions as well. Then you can modify the properties of that particular on these sections here. So you can increase the opacity or increase the blur effect and things like that. And as usual, you can add multiple effects. Then you have an option to export it. So this is useful when you want to export your assets to your developers when they have to create some things, or export it as a JPEG wherever we want to send a demo or things like that, right? So in this case, you can basically export it in 4 formats, which is PNG, JPEG, SVG, and PDF. So just select the format, select the scaling that you want. If you want it in 1x, just select 1x and just click on export. It gets added onto your downloads folder or wherever you want it. And you can also see a preview of whatever you want to export right here. So that covers the right side panel of the design properties. And then you have some prototype and inspect. We'll talk more about this in just a couple of minutes. And there is also auto layout. This is again an advanced topic. We'll talk about this again in our next sessions as well. So we'll talk about some of the features that you see on the top here, right? So these are some tools also used for the design purpose. So the first thing here is to edit an object. So if I click on this, it gets converted into an edit mode. And now as you can see, I can change the nodes and edit the way it looks, right? And then you have component. So this is to create a component. I'll talk about this in just a couple of seconds, but let's talk about the masking option here. So if I want to mask something, for example, I just duplicate this, I can click on this and use this as a mask, right? So if I click on mask, it gets masked on this layer and I can change this anytime and edit it, right? So that is how mask behaves. And apart from that, you also have some Boolean options. So if I click on this, you can basically combine these using union, or I can use subtract and intersect and exclude, right? So those are the different options on Boolean as well. We'll talk more about this later. So that being said, I'll just create a component and show you how it works. Let's create a card UI design, right? So for that, I'm going to create a rectangle first. So that's a rectangle. I'll align it using these align options. So these are different options to align your object. And next thing, I'm going to add some rounded corners to it. It looks good. So I'll make the color of this as white and change the frame color to a bit grayish look so that the card is visible properly. And inside the card, I'm going to add another rectangle. Probably we could use this as an image. So let's copy an image onto this. So let's take this one itself. I'll copy this, and images, you can add it into different rectangles, right? It gets embedded into that. So if I click on Command V or Control V to paste it, you can see that it gets pasted inside the rectangle as a fill. So that is how images work in Figma. So we have our image, we have our card. Let's add a small title to this. So this is going to be a title. I'll increase the size and also maybe make it semi-bold so it looks like a title. And then I can duplicate this by using Control D or Command D so it gets duplicated. Or also I can use an Option or Alt, click and drag it, right? So that is the easier way of duplicating things. So I'll reduce the size of this, make this medium. So I'll just copy this and put it onto this, right? So you can see that it got extended. So you can just click and drag it and it changes the width of this, right? So that's how you create a small card. And now that we have created this card, to make it consistent or reuse things, we can make it as a component, right? So what I'll do is I'll just select all of these. I'll click on this option, which is create component, or you can also right click, use this option create component. Both of the things work the same way. So I'll click on this, and as you can see, the selection changed into a purple color, which indicates that this is a component now. You can also see the symbol got changed here, which represents a component. So now this is a component, and as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, in the assets panel, you can see your components, right? So there you go, your component is being created. Now I can just simply drag this and use it multiple times, right? So if I have different frames, I can just drag it, bring it here, and it gets added. So that is how we create components. The best part about components is this is your main component, right? You can see the main component has a different symbol, and the instances, that is the duplicates of the component, have a different icon to represent it. So I can go up to my main component. Let's say I want this to have some rounded corners. I just need to come in here and add rounded corners, and you can see it gets reflected on all the other components, right? So if I change the position of this, it gets reflected as well. So that is the best part of components, right? So this really is helpful to create a lot of designs with a lot of ease. So that being said, that is about the components, and let me just use this option to tidy it up so the spacing is even, and I can add the spacing from here as well, right? And the next thing is we'll talk about the prototype and the inspect, and probably that should be the end of this video. So what I'll do is I'll just duplicate this frame and show you how prototype works. So let's say we have a screen where these populate in. So first time you don't see anything, and maybe on a button click. So I'll just create a small button here. So I'll just use a rectangle and maybe give it a color. So we'll make it a bluish color and give it some rounded corners and call this as open app. This is just a very random demo, right? Just to show you the prototype feature. So here we have a button, and when I click on open app, that is when I want these cards to show up. So I'll just delete it and I'll click on the frame, go to prototype tab. On click of this, you get this plus icon, which is to link screens. So I just need to click on this and drag it to the screen I want to open on click of this. And as soon as I leave it, you get the options of the interaction. You can set different triggers here if you want that to happen on mouse enter, on click, or things like that, right? So I just want it on tap, so I'll leave it on tap. I want to navigate it to frame 2, and here you can set the animation type. If you want that to happen instantly, you can use instant. So let's see how this behaves so that you understand it better. So as I mentioned, you just need to click on this present prototype option, and that is when your prototype gets loaded up. So you can see you have your screen. When I click on this, it shows up instantly, right? So that is the animation of instant. But if I change this to dissolve and give it a couple of seconds, so let's make it 1 second, which is 1000 milliseconds. And now if you see it, I press on R to refresh it, and I click on this, it slowly comes in, right? So that is how it behaves. And then you also have an option to smart animate. This is really useful and it's amazing. Let me just show you an example for that as well. For that, you need to copy the instance of second screen onto the first screen. Then only this method works. Then I'll just select all these, I'll move it down, I'll decrease the opacity of this one, right? So it's not visible anymore. And now let's see how this behaves, right? So on click of this button, I go to prototype, I click the interaction and change this to smart animate. So now see how this behaves. So once I click on this open app, you can see how they fade in from the bottom to the top, and that is smart animate. Smart animate basically takes the first instance and moves it to the second instance. So it's like having a first frame and a second frame, and it automatically does the animation between these two frames, right? And you have a lot of other prototyping features, which we'll be talking more about those on our future sessions. Then you have different options to set your device and everything. So if I choose iPhone 8 as the device, that is why you see this, right? So I can change the color of the device as well. I can change it to space gray, and you can see it gets reflected here. So those are different options. And then you have inspect, which is for handovering it to your developers. So once you're done with all your designs, you can go to inspect tab. The developers can just click on different objects right here and see the different CSS properties. They can also copy the CSS code as well, right? So they can also copy the iOS code or the Android code. So those are the different things, and that is how you hand over the designs to your developers, and they can start building it on the development tools, right? So that being said, I hope this gives you a very beginner guide to get started on Figma. So in our future sessions, we'll be talking about more advanced topics. So make sure if you like this video, drop a thumbs up, and also subscribe to the channel if you want to get updates about the next sessions that I do. As always, thanks for watching.